Senator Pete Ricketts of Nebraska. Good morning, Senator. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Always great to have you.
Good morning, Hugh. Thanks for having me on.
Senator, you are the newest member of the Senate. What do you find to be the oddest thing about that yet?
Well, I would say one of the things that is different from what maybe most people's expectations are is that you see on the media all the time about the political divisiveness and the toxic environment. And I would say in the U.S. Senate, it's much more collegial. Certainly, we have big differences philosophically, but most people treat their colleagues respectfully. And there is hopefully some common ground we can find on to get things done for the country. And we did just pass the National Defense Authorization Act. So sometimes we can get together and actually do things that are going to protect the country.
Now, Senator Ricketts, I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things that is not protecting the country is Senator Tuberville's hold on 300 military officers, all branches. And it's not just 300. Admiral Stavridis says multiply that by 10,000 because, of course, it's a pyramid. And every time you don't promote a colonel to become a general or a captain to become an admiral, you don't appoint a commander to become a captain or a lieutenant colonel to become a colonel. And there are all the families and the dependents. Have you talked to Senator Tuberville about this? It's never been done before, and it's a disaster for national security.
Yeah, certainly, Senator Tuberville's got to do what he thinks he needs to do for his constituents. I've heard from a number of military officers about the problems that this creates, just as you were describing. I think it also gets to just some of the social engineering that the Biden administration is doing. I mean, I'm a pro-life guy, and I got to tell you, one of the things most taxpayers agree is that the federal government should not be funding abortions. And that's what this policy is. And it's also part of what they're doing with DEI and critical race theory. And what we really need to focus on is the readiness of the military to be able to protect us. That needs to be job number one for the military. And that's really what the policies we need to pursue is going to be.
Well, I agree with that. And in fact, I'm as pro life as anyone on the air and have been for a long, long time. Not surprisingly, Roman Catholics are often. So I'm very pro life, but I don't believe in hostage taking. And I do believe in military readiness. Yesterday, Governor Haley said, or Ambassador Haley said, this will increase our recruitment crisis because if you treat the military as a plaything, as Senator Tuberville is, to score what is a very valid point. It's illegal what Lloyd Austin and Joe Biden did. It violates the Hyde Amendment. So it's very illegal, but I don't believe in punishing innocent people for the illegalities of Lloyd Austin and Joe Biden. Have you actually sat down and talked with him about this? I don't think he understands it.
Yeah, no, this is something that's definitely come up when we've been in the cloakroom talking as senators and so forth. And I think right now where Senator Tuberville is, he just wants to vote on this issue. So if Senator Schumer will give him that vote, I think that's one of the things that will help him let go of these holds.
Yeah, but if I'm Schumer and the Republicans are setting fire to themselves, it's the oldest rule of politics: is don't interfere with an opponent who's destroying themselves. Even pro-life people like me think this is an abuse of career people who have served 20, 25 years. And then people like lieutenants, Admiral Stavridis just said every aide to every general officer gets screwed by this as well. I'm being very emphatic about this because there are a lot of retired military in Maine. I talked to an active duty officer last week and a retired officer. They think it's outrageous. And Senator Tuberville told Politico, oh, I haven't heard from anyone about this. 60 to 70% of my people support it. That's just political. It's not reasonable.
Yeah, no, I totally get where you're coming from, Hugh, on the problems it's creating for our military. As I said, I've talked to a number of folks in the military about this at really high levels. And, I agree. It's definitely a challenge. And hopefully when we get back, Senator Tuberville will be able to figure out a way to make sure we can get our military readiness back to where it's going to be, where it needs to be.
Now, you said you passed the NDAA, so you had a vote on this particular issue. You had to because it was in the House version, or at least you will have a vote on this in the conference committee, right?
Yeah, so it was not a part of the Senate bill, but we'll see what comes out of the conference bill on this.
I just don't know how we satisfy him. I mean, there's no end in sight, and the Democrats aren't going to give up on this. So let's move on. I understand it's an uncomfortable position. I try not to hector senators about it because they don't like to criticize members of their own party. But it hasn't been discussed in the conference, Senator.
So, yeah, I mean, this is definitely something that has been a conversation among a number of the senators about what Senator Tuberville is doing and the way to get around it.
I've seen Senator Romney comment on this. I just think it's going to hurt every Republican the way it hurts every military person. I think we're going to lose people, career military officers, and you represent a lot of them, don't you?
Yeah, we certainly have. We're proud to host Offutt Air Force Base in the 55th Wing, and then of course Stratcom is located also on Offutt Air Force Base. So yeah, like I said, I've heard from the highest level officials about the problems this is creating.
All right. So, Senator, what other committees did they put you on? Are you on ag?
I am not on agriculture. Our senior senator Deb Fisher is on agriculture, but she suggested to me Environment and Public Works, which I am sitting on, and that's one that oversees the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers and deals a lot with regulation, which is something as governor I dealt with a lot. And so this is something that's right up my alley, and I've had the chance to push back on the EPA on a number of different things like the tailpipe emissions, where they wanted to have 2/3 of all vehicles by 2032 to be sold to be electric vehicles. And just the problems that creates in states like Nebraska that are very rural, it just isn't practical. So some of the things we've been doing is questioning them about, have you done the math to see how much power generation we'll need to do this? And of course, the answer is no. They haven't thought this out at all. And I've also introduced with Senator Klobuchar the Flex Fuel Fairness Act to allow flex fuel vehicles, those that burn, E85, to get the same sort of credits that electric vehicles are. This is just another example of the Biden administration having an agenda around pushing electric vehicles, not really about reducing carbon. If they were really about reducing carbon, they would support things like biofuels, which help reduce our carbon outputs out of the tailpipes, and give flex fuel vehicles, for example, the same sort of credit they're giving EVs. And by the way, we have a distribution system already built for this. We don't have to reinvent one. And this is something that will work in rural states like Nebraska. So anyway, so that's one of the committees that I'm on. I'm also on foreign relations, where we oversee the State Department. I've helped, for example, work with James Langford on the Passport Act to get some of those some amendments onto the State Department bill, which was a part of the NDAA to help improve how we get passports done. So a couple of key committees there that I'm enjoying.
You mentioned oversight of the Army Corps of Engineers. The Supreme Court issued a very important ruling this year telling the Army Corps of Engineers to stop over expanding their regulatory jurisdiction. Have they done so? Have they followed the clear direction of the Supreme Court not to exceed actual navigable waters of the United States? Get out of the pothole business, get out of the reservoir business, stick to navigable waters.
Yeah, we're going to still be monitoring this to see what happens, because one of the issues I've had previously with the Army Corps of Engineers is just the bureaucratic red tape. And you're exactly right. Navigable waters means navigable. This is a problem the EPA has as well when they're pushing their waters to the U.S. rule, which has been pushing this. So we're going to continue to monitor and see what the Army Corps does. I've had meetings with them to stress that we would need to make sure that we're getting things done. And I don't know if you're aware of this one, Hugh. We had tried for 6 years to get a permit to raise the levees around Offutt Air Force Base, where Stratcom's located. And we finally got it just months before we had a 500-year flood that did $1 billion of damage to Offutt Air Force Base.
Oh my gosh.
If the Army Corps had been able to turn that permit around in just 4 years, which would still be terrible service, we would have been able to get those levees raised and prevent $1 billion in taxpayer damage, losses to that Air Force base, which is also harming our national security. So that's an example of how we have to do a better job with the Army Corps in holding them accountable and making sure we're getting, the permits we need in a timely manner.
Governor, I'm retired now as an active lawyer. I keep my bar membership going in D.C. and California, but I represented landowners on 404 permits forever. The Army Corps of Engineers is not the worst run federal agency. That would be the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, followed closely by EPA. But boy, they are bad, and they need a lot of oversight. Do you think they got the message about the damage that was done to the Air Force Base because they sat around on their butts doing nothing?
Yeah, I think they've got that message. That I brought up that point in our EPW committee. I've also had a chance to meet with our local colonel. I do think that there is a new leadership effort to be more responsive. And I will tell you, just talking to my Department of Transportation in Nebraska, that the relationship has improved dramatically over the last several years. So I do think they're getting the message, and we're going to just continue to monitor it, but I think we're making progress.
I'm glad to hear that. That is an excellent issue. Thank you, Senator Ricketts, for joining me. I always appreciate having a former governor as a senator, because they bring a whole bunch of perspective to the nation's greatest deliberative body. And please go find Tommy Tuberville and say to him he's doing enormous damage to human beings who've got nothing to do with his beef.